let's call prompt color, just because. Article 1 dot prompt color. I'm going to hack my way through here, if you don't mind. So what I'm doing is I am spitting the article before I called prompt color, and then after it's done, after it's done, I'm going to print the article again, and by then it should have an actual property on it. Let's put 5 seconds. So I'm going to do yellow. Of course, there's no view here. It doesn't do anything. If I open this one and this one, let's see. This one has, yeah, I think I need to open it. There's some weird thing in Chrome that you need to actually open it. Ooh, sorry. Did anybody see? Maybe like this. Okay, so this one has no attributes. Okay, and now if I put yellow, the second one actually has an attribute now, and its color equal yellow. And there was an event actually happening under the hood when we changed the value. We saw that there's a change event, but that's all under the hood. Nobody listened to that event, so it probably fired. It didn't do anything, and that's what's nice about it. I'm only actually interacting with the feature I'm using. So I'm not going to care for events so far yet, but I'm going to go fetch the data and would inspect the output from the server. So let's start by fetching a specific URL. So let's say we want this article. Okay? How do we know what's the URL? How does it, like I saw already that there's a fetch. I told you that there's a fetch method that gets the data. But how does it get the data from? So probably if I actually read it in order, I would see somewhere here it says like URL. It's got to be a URL. URL and or URL root options may be passed when creating a new model that needs to have custom one-off URL. Okay, what about if I want to always use the same URL? Blah, 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 blah. I'm just skimming through the thing. Where's my URL? Did I skip it? Anybody see URL? I don't see URL. No. If you pass blah, 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 no. Okay, let's just put this URL there. So it mentioned that you can have a URL thing here, URL, and I'm just going to put this here. I don't need the prompt color anymore. Okay, so I'm going into this URL. Would something happen? Does anybody know if I'm going to get anything already? No. And the reason is because I didn't tell it to go bring the data from the server. Because again, there's one object running, like living on the server, and there's one on the client. The default one for the client is an empty object. And what we are doing is we're in fact telling my client code to sync up from the server. So this object in memory, the empty one in JavaScript, would just fetch the data from the server and reset itself according to the server. If you then go and make some modification in memory, you can sync it the other way and actually save it to the server. So it's just a way to reflect your server-side APIs on the client side. So now I'm going to call. So if I run it, it would be just like empty. But if I'm going to call article1 dot fetch, I think you can do even this. So you can see that I'm using setTimeout. There's probably better ways than using setTimeout to know when the data is ready. We already saw that there are event for that. So we'll switch to that in a few seconds. But for now, we're just going to use it. So we are fetching, and 5 seconds later, we expected to get the data back. And article 1 should probably have something more meaningful. I think we need to specify somewhere to use jQuery. Let's read jQuery. I am not sure. I think there's a... Yeah? Let's see. Yeah. This is the before. Yeah. So this one is the second one. And we actually see the data now. So if we go into the network, there was an actual request to the server to that particular URL. So it wasn't that, difficult. We just told it what URL to bring. And it brought us this article. You see? We have all the different properties that we wanted from the server. So it's in memory. If we had a view, which is just a template, we could take this data and just render it. If we don't need to do anything more crazy against this data. If you need to do, like models actually support a lot of other features. But in our case, that's what we wanted, to just grab the data. We don't want to specify the ID. Like this is a general article class, but it's fetching one particular article. So we want to take out this specific ID and replace it with something else. So let's start on that. And then another thing that we want to fix is this thing. We don't want to wait 5 seconds. We want to do something when we get the data. So let's fix those two problems. Let's start with this one. This looks quite simple. So if I open here, if I'm going to look at fetch. So fetch, model.fetch, and you can specify options. And returns blah, blah, blah. Accepts success and error callbacks in the option hash. Hash is an object, which are both passed model, response, and options. So I can pass an object, which is a hash, and it can have a success and error, and I can deal with both of these cases. So let's replace this. I can do this. Success. So this can be a function. Error can be a function. I would need to actually think about what I do if I get an error. But for now, when it succeeds, I can actually just print it out. So I don't need to wait 5 seconds now. I should be good. And for now, let's do window.alert. Error grabbing article. It should never happen. We can actually simulate it. We can drop the server and run this. But we don't really care for that. So now it should work still, but it should be quite instantaneous. So if I go to console, boom, right away. Okay, there was like a brief second where it actually fetched the data. So that's one problem that we had. Quite nice. And then the second one is we wanted to not go to the same article again and again, but instead we want to pass an ID. And that's the term that you use to instantiate models. So every model can have an ID, and it would be able to use that ID as part of the URL. So I think if we go back here, there's the URL and URL root, which were explained. Oh, here it is. That's part of the model. Returns the relative URL where the model resource would be located on the server. So that's what we used so far. If your models are located somewhere else, override this method with the correct logic. Generates URLs of form collection.url/id. But you may override it using URL root. So if you have an ID that you want to pass to every instantiation that you make of this article object, you can specify that by specifying the URL root, which would just be this part. And it would just shove the ID at the end, which is the way RESTful services usually work. So instead of specifying the full URL, we're going to specify URL root. So URL root, and we will grab this part, and we will call it with this. So the last slash, like this. Yeah? Okay. So this should be good. And now I need to specify this somewhere, because if I just run it now, it would create a new article instance, but it would not know what's the ID. So I need to tell it somehow what's the ID. And the way to do it in Backbone is when you instantiate something, you can instantiate it with attributes already. So when creating an instance of a model, you can pass in the initial values of attributes. And one of those is ID, a special property of models. An ID is an arbitrary string, integer, or whatever you want. If you set the ID, it will be copied into the model. Models can be retrieved by ID from collection, and the ID is used to generate model URLs. So that's what we actually want. So we can specify this here. So I can do something like this. So now I'm creating this article, giving it this particular ID. It would append it to the URL, and it would go and fetch this particular ID. And then I can instantiate in the different articles. Okay? Quite nice. Let's see if it still works. Yeah, it works. But now I can actually instantiate a few of these. So let's drop this guy, and let's do this here. And let's give it a different ID. Let's take this guy. And then we already know that this one has, let's title, and then this guy. Whoop. Oh, we got the same one. Okay, so now if I print it, what did I mess up? Anybody find? Or it's just not loading the data? Oh. No, we broke it. What is it? Get title. Yes, that's one. Like this. We saw set already. The reciprocal get is like this. You don't want to go directly to the objects because we saw that a model is actually a more complex object. It has attributes. It doesn't actually have like .title on it. There's attributes, the attributes are there, and there's convenience methods like get and set to actually change these so that you don't change it under the hood, because you actually want Backbone to know that you're changing something, because it needs to signal events and whatnot. Is there another issue? Yeah, and we instantiated 2 of them. Each one brought its own data, and everything is good. And we actually made 2 requests to the server. So that's quite nice with just a few lines of code. Do we want to write tests against this one? I would say yes. We would probably want to start the server. That's the easiest one that I can think of. Start the server and actually instantiate one and see that you get a title, a body, something. Just that. It will tell you that the server is working correctly, that your model actually goes into the right URL, gets the data, and it populates everything that your app would actually need in the end. I think I have that. You know what? Let's look at how it would be to write one of those, because we don't have that much time. So, you know what? I think we'll switch entirely now to look at the code that I've made, because I think we kind of got the hang of how it is to read the docs and build something on the fly. So we can, I'm going to check out the last one, which is 5. I'm going to drop everything that we did. And then we can actually look at the code and the test and run everything and see it all in action. I think git reset would not do everything. RM. I'm just going to do this. If somebody knows how to do this through Git, that would be awesome. OK. So I'm back to, so I upgraded to the latest code, which has Backbone already as part of it. So we have 30 minutes, so we can actually inspect all the code and then have a good discussion about what it is about web apps that we actually going to build, how you would build web apps yourself, and what other features would you need to incorporate. So for now, let's see what I wrote before. So I actually did kind of the same thing. So I have jQuery underscore and backbone, and I still use the require.js to load all my code. Within it, we saw that there's a reader that calls main.start, which is exactly what I had now. And now we have quite a lot of things. It's quite complex to start here, so I'll jump to where we actually want to look at. So specifically, you see this guy. This is the home page. So section, you see line 4, var article previews. Give me the model called article previews. I misused the name there. It's actually a collection. It should probably live in a collections folder. But Backbone has this term for getting a set of data. So in this case, if we look again in our API, so there's not a lot of magic into Backbone. There's only models, you can see here. There's collection, which I'm going to explain now. And then I'm going to skip a few. And then there's view, which we're going to use to render anything. And then there's like router, which we'll mention in the end. But there's only like 3 core things that you have. So it's quite important that we understand what the collection is and the view. So this is a good example for a collection. We have a set of articles. So with a collection, you can fetch this URL and instantiate multiple models of something. So in this case, this is not a full article. And I actually built a different model for it. First of all, it doesn't have URLs. It just lives within the collection. And second, they have different parameters, different properties. So I wouldn't want to use the same one. So there's an article model and an article preview model. The preview only have these 4 properties. So if we're going to look here, I'm going to use the collection that I have, and I'm calling a method on it called grab from server. And kind of like the Backbone way, it expects success and error callbacks. And when it succeeds, meaning it went to the server and brought my list of articles, my collection of articles, it will be able to instantiate a view and pass the data to it. The data here is going to be a collection. So this section view would generate my section front, and it expects a collection of articles to be there. Let's look at what article previews actually do. So article previews, not that different than what we had before. There's quite a lot of boilerplate because I used my method for grab from server. If I were not to use that and I would call fetch instead, it would probably be like 4 lines. But still. So what do I have here? Article previews actually have a model called article preview. So each one of those 4 properties is a model of its own. Bless you. And it's fetching them all from this URL. So it instantiates, when it fetches from the server, instantiate a bunch of these article previews. Let's open this article preview. Nothing. It's empty. Whatever the server brings, it's just going to use it. So you probably want to have something more meaningful here. Like you would actually want to see that you brought in like 4 fields or something like that. Because otherwise your server, if it goes haywire, your app would probably break at some point. So you would want to validate here that you got the right data. So just by me specifying bring this model, like a list of these models, it would go and instantiate this one. We can do console.log here. So this is when it finishes fetch. Let's do this. I'm going to do console.log article previews. The reason I'm not by default putting a parens around my console.log is because of CoffeeScript. So if we go into our app, okay, so first of all, there was a request to get the /section, which is the URL that brings you all of everything. But we can actually see the collection that we brought. So this is all this code up until this point. So this is this part. Yeah? The code below you don't care about yet. So it actually went and brought this. What is this? This is, look at this. It has a length property that specifies how many objects in this collections live. And each one of them is a child is actually an object of that other thing, that model that we instantiated. So each one of those is actually a 4-property model that has those 4 things, and we can then go and use this. So we have a collection of 10 articles. Each one is a model, a backbone model that has like 4 fields. Awesome. So we can actually use it. So let's look at the view. So this part just calls back the callback. So let's look at the view. So the view actually gets the collection. This is just a value that I'm passing to it, and based on the value that I'm passing, it's going to render something on screen. So let's open section view. Views, section view. I'm going to skip through some parts. Like this is not really, oops, sorry. This is not really needed. It's not doing anything. This we don't care about yet. But this part is. So when we make a call, we get the section view. We immediately call render on it, which goes and renders it. It renders, as you can see, it doesn't interact with our DOM yet. It just renders it in memory. And then I can actually take it and take the output of it and do something with it. And that's what I'm doing here. In line 57, I actually take the output of it and shove it into the DOM. Where? Into my screen center. So you see how it works? I go fetch the data, I get the data, I create the view and render it, and then attach it to my center screen. So that's how I get my full first page. Later, when I want to grab when the user clicks on an article, once the user clicks, I would go to the server, grab a particular article using that model, the article, the same that we built ourselves. And once I have it, I'm going to render it using an article view. And I'm going to pass that model to the article view, and it would render the article on screen. And I would then attach it to the DOM, similarly like this. So let's look at the view. So the view, and most of the things here, you can see I only am using like 3 things on the view. So it's probably quite easy to get it right by reading the docs. So there's a template here that I have, and it's nothing. I don't think it's even mentioned in the docs, because it's just my way of putting the template for this view, and here I already read it. So it's not interactive with anything in Backbone. I could have called it Ohad and called it Ohad, like this. Underscore template is a templating language. So in this case, I'm not using any of the features. It's just like an HTML snippet here that I have. So when I call underscore template, it runs these strings and compiles a function for me. And then I can invoke it with whatever data I want. And it would render this template using this data. In this case, I don't care for anything. So I'm just rendering it as is. I'm actually getting like 2 divs. That's all there is. And then I actually go and spit it into the element that Backbone created for me. But so this, if I disable everything here, I would be able to see that we grabbed and created within, oops, sorry, return this. Did it work? Yeah. So I just created 2 divs. That's it. It didn't do anything. Because I didn't need to have the data for these 2 fields. But if I actually continue, it then goes and picks out this article previews, which is this part, this div, and would go and render this article preview view, which we'll look at in a few seconds, and would actually render this guy with this particular article. So you see, I'm just instantiating another view, and I'm passing a model to it. And I enumerate here over the different articles in my collection. We already saw that we have 10 of those. And then each one is rendered separately and being appended. So when I run this, what I get here is under Screen Center, under article previews, I get 10 snippets of views that this other view generated for me. So I have like my collection separately. I have my collection and model. I have a view for the top level one. I have a view for the small article previews. Each one is quite separate and quite simple. And if I open the article preview, what does this do? So this one actually has like a more complex template. It actually has like a thumbnail. It has like, you see the image tag here. And it has like the headline and title, and this actually spits some of the data that the model is specifying. So the model specifies 4 fields, and this one actually inspects those 4 fields. So when I instantiate it, I actually pass the model that was passed to me. So I actually take the attributes, the 4 attributes that were fetched, and actually instantiate, like renders this template with those 4 fields. Does it make sense? Do you want me to show you a bit how it works? Okay. I want to leave some time for a Q&A. So let's skip over how, go into even more in depth on this. So we passed a model to it. It created some template, it took some template and created some HTML, and then we hooked up that HTML here. So this view, actually using another view, actually creates all the hierarchy needs on the screen. This is quite nice and simple. You can see how to make events as well to actually allow users to click. But I think for now, let's go into looking at some of the tests that I have. It's quite simple. So we can test the views separately. We can test the models separately. If you want to test the views, you probably want to mock the data. So you can just create like a new backbone object and give it like the 4 properties that you wanted. Yeah, we saw it just expects 4 properties to get from the server. So instead, you can just instantiate a new model and pass the initial attributes to be title something, URL something, whatever. And that's about it. And then you can actually instantiate a view using that model. And you can actually, without having the entire app Chrome there, you can actually embed it, just spit it into the DOM. I can show you here. So I can actually do I have all of these? No, I think I didn't. Let's do something nice. So this would show you how easy it is to be able to test something like this. Window.apv. Oop. Okay, I'm exporting it to the window. Yeah, you would normally write test. You would use the require.js. You would grab this file. You would instantiate it. You can do something like this. For now, I'm just going to hack it to show you. So now, once I run it, I actually have apv here. And this one, again, this is just a model. I can do whatever. Sorry, this is just a view. I can just, call nothing.render on it, and it would render, and I would get like a var x equal this guy. sorry. New APB. Let's put some data. So title, hello. Does it need everything? Does anybody know why we're getting issues? Anybody know? I think it needs a model. So let's do let me show you the test that I already have built. That's going to be just the same. So what I made here under tests, I have two levels of tests that I built. Unit tests would be easier for us to understand. So this is a good example of how you would write an article test. So when I want to test the model, okay? So I actually want to see that it grabs the data from the server and, you know, export the properties correctly. So this is, like, look at this. This is my boilerplate code that I have. I was able to get most of everything that you need for the test out of my files. There's actually like one file here that does some magic to make it work. Like, that's it. But I did it once, and all the tests are now simple. And you can see here, I use require.js, and I give it the model file, and then I can actually look at it. So this is a constructor function, yeah? I can invoke it and create instances. So this is one test that I have. And then let's see that it fetches correctly. So if I look at this, I didn't actually want to run the server because unit tests, you probably want to finish quite fast. So I Googled, I didn't Google, but I went into npm.js, npm.js. And I searched for mock or stub or something like that. And it found that there's like a knock thing. I don't know how I found it. HTTP server mocking. So I can actually say, listen, when somebody goes and asks for /API/article/1234, brings this data, send this data back. So I actually have in my tests a folder here that all my tests relies on. All of them rely on this file. So that I can call this again and again, it would always bring the same file. If I needed another file with an image and without an image, I can specify two different fixtures. But my test is super simple. I can actually, so now I'm actually telling the server, like, respond with this article. And now I'm going to go fetch. It doesn't go over the network. It actually, this knock thing actually replies for it and specify this data. So my server can be, you know, shut down. And then it just goes and creates an article and fetches it and expect all these attributes to be there. That's it. I can then go into my command line and I can run npm test. You see, if you look at unit tests here, I can do npm run script unit tests. And it would go, should have successfully retrieved the article. I think I changed this and I didn't commit it back. Or not. But it's awesome. It tells me that there's something wrong with my code now. I can actually go and fix it. Maybe I should reset everything. Would it work? I broke it yesterday. But that's good. Like, something is actually broken. That's a good time to go and fix the code. Maybe I would spend probably by tomorrow I'll have an answer what I broke. And you can look at this code and you can fix it yourself and you can build some of the advanced features. But it's quite simple to just run this code and see that it actually fetches the data. Let's look at a test for a view, because that's quite interesting. Somebody asked here, like, how do you actually test your UI? You build UI. How do you actually test it? You know, there's like a left column, a right column. It's really hard to do testing against these kind of things. What if somebody then later wants me to make it 600 pixels? Would my test fail or not? So I took a different approach here where you actually unit test the individual views and models. So in my tests for views, I don't actually go and test pixels. I test output. I test that I have a URL somewhere in my DOM, that I have an A tag with this URL. So take a look at this. This is my article view that we saw before. And I actually go and fetch the same article that I had before. So I'm using the same fixture from before. But then I go and create it. And once I create it, where is it? This guy? Okay. So I go and create it, and then I instantiate this article view with whatever I got from my model. And then I actually use jQuery to say, okay, give me the element. Okay, do I have an A tag here? Awesome. What is the href? Is the href the same as my model's URL? So I can actually inspect the UI aspects of my code and see that it actually didn't break. If somebody goes and drops the open tag from the A, this would fail because there would not be an A tag. It actually uses jQuery here. It uses the DOM and jQuery within Node.js to actually test my code. So that's quite nice. I think we are almost done with this part. So let's skip over all of this. We already talked about this. Oop. Sorry, PowerPoint app. I started building it in PowerPoint. Now I work at Google. We don't have PowerPoint so much. So, okay. Please retry later. Come on. Let's see if this part works. Oh, that's going to be annoying now. Okay. I hope it will work eventually. I can pick it up myself. So I'll try refreshing every few minutes. So what we built is a simple app. Okay, we have a home page. We didn't look at there's another page. We intercept when a user clicks on one of the articles. We tiered on the home page. We instantiate another view. We render it on screen. We show the back button. There's another view for the back button that we call a method on it that I made that called show and hide. It's just, display none on it or something like that. And then I intercept clicks on that button and I signal something in the top level that says like back is clicked, and now my app can actually go back to the first page. And that's where Backbone's router can be quite handy. So Backbone has one more feature that's called a router. Oh, there we go. That's called a router that allows you to actually route between different parts of your app. You can define different URLs. You can say, let's say pound home is my homepage. Pound section slash something is, slash article slash something is going to that particular article. And you can specify different things. You can article 1, article 2. It doesn't need to be complex. It doesn't need to mimic anything on the server side. And that would just be in the browser's hash in that part of the URL. It wouldn't go to the server, but then my code actually, all I need to do if I want to switch from that page to this page, I'm just going to navigate to a different URL. I'm going to tell the browser, when I want to go back, just go to /home, or pound home, and that's it. If I configure the router correctly, it would actually go back and would call my code to instantiate my home page. So right now, if you look at the code, it actually has quite a lot of things in main.js. It doesn't use router. So there's actually like the start, which is the home page. And then when we want to open an article, it does this. So as you can see, this is one code that's like runs throughout my app. So it's really hard to test this. And therefore, I wasn't able to get like tests against this code. But if I were to use a router, I can actually build 2 different controllers and test each one of them separately. Okay, let's wrap up. Come on. Yeah, it's not going to go well. So let's say we build our web app. What do we need next? What would we do? it's nice to just create the views and everything. You would want to start thinking about other things in your web app. So one thing is like, OK, I have a web app. What do I do with it? Of course, you can put it on a website somewhere. Everybody who has access to it, you can, I don't know, send emails or whatnot, and everybody would be able to get to your web app. But you can actually use some other tools to be able to take this web app and ship it as a native app. So for instance, you can take one of these, and using PhoneGap, which is now called Apache Cordova, and you can take this entire code, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, and just embed it within a browser's web view, which is the technical term, within a native app. So what PhoneGap allows you to do is actually just take your code and just build an app that runs your code. So if you build everything like we had just now, you can actually rep it and send it on the App Store. Everybody can download. You can charge money for it. So it gives you a lot of new avenues. And this is, let me show you this one. Sorry, not this guy. This guy. This is when I was working at Reuters. We built this thing, which is a web app. And originally, we thought of putting it on a website. But in the end, because of product decisions, we wanted to ship it like a native app and replace our existing iPad app. So we just wrapped it. We built a few hooks to make it work faster and like interact with some native features. But it was just the same code base. And we, at some point, we had the same code base run on both different platforms, which is awesome. And you can do the same for Android. And if you're using something like PhoneGap, you can actually, with one click, like release a version throughout your different devices. It's a big feature. It's super simple as well. We're going to do edit presentation because we can jump to the last page. So this is one thing. Allows you like new avenues to monetize your app and like just generally like have more people look at your app. Here, we don't have a lot more. Is that OK? So another thing that you can do, we didn't do that well here, is support some different devices. So somebody asked me before, like, can you do something like responsive design or something like that to support our devices? And the answer is yes. It shouldn't be that complex. So most of the code that I wrote, like the individual views, probably actually works quite well on a small phone. It probably can work well if I were to expand it across my screen. Or if I were to create a multi-column thing where you would have a few articles on one, like a few articles on the same line, that would work still. All you need is just to say, OK, for this device, I want to have like 2 columns where I put like views on. And that's it. You can just render views differently. Like just render them on a different place on the page. So there's like different directions you can take here. But some of these will allow you to use the same code base, the same exact code base, or most of the same exact code base, and just change the different interaction points with it. So you can support all crazy devices with the same code base. Another big feature that you can do on HTML5 is support offline. So what does it mean to support offline? So one thing is using a feature called cache manifest, you can specify that your app when the browser downloads your files, your HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, it should cache these for quite some time. It would not rely on the normal browser caching, but would cache it as an app. So all the files would actually live offline. And a good example of that is Gmail. So if you open a new tab, I think, is it here? Like these ones, like Gmail, is actually working offline. It's the same URL, and you're not connected to anywhere, but it still runs your code. Now, your code needs to know that you're offline. Your code would just execute. You, in your code, need to say, and there's another HTML5 feature for it, if navigator.online, and you can test, am I online, am I offline? If I'm online, I'm probably not going to run my fetch against my models, because that would fail. Instead, I would want to fetch it from storage or something. And that's the third part. If you want to support something like offline, is to be able to actually store the data on the device. When you grab the data from the server, you want to store it so that if the user goes offline, you can then show it. There's a lot of cool apps that use all these features. And it's a bit tricky because you need to worry about like, okay, what if the user makes modifications and I'm offline? What if then there's like an incoming data that's different? How do you handle these cases? It's not that simple, but it is quite simple. So on both of the apps that I showed from the New York Times and Reuters, we actually used like WebSQL. When you get the data, we stored it in some tables, and then it worked. Like once you get the data, you navigate within that data. You never go to the server. So it's instantaneous. If you click on something, it shows. It doesn't even go over the wire. It actually looks like the native app. It goes and downloads all the different bundles, the different section, and that's it. It's done. It's up to date. One thing I didn't show is deployment processes. You can use Grunt or whatever deployment system your specific company is using, but you can actually automate most of the things that we did here. So once you have less in place, you would want to compile it when you make changes and not have your user download the files. You can automate it using Grunt or anything like that. The same goes for the required JS, and same goes for tests. If you build like good coverage of your code, you would want to run it every time. We have in our mobile website, the last project that I worked on, we had over 300 tests. Some of them are quite simple, testing one view, different aspects of it, but it's like every commit, you know that you broke something. You're working on something that's like across the board, you see that you broke stuff. So it's quite handy. I think that's about it. So thank you very much, first of all. You can go grab the presentation if you want. Please go rate this presentation that I gave. You have the URL here. And if anybody has questions. Thank you. So the question was, when you write code, your view and template, how do you separate the designer part from the code-wise, the developer part? Not super simple. One way is to allow the designer to go in your LESS files or CSS files, and that's it. So your code is always, like your template is always the same, and they can go change pixels, they can change margins and padding and whatnot and colors without you needing to go and change that. But if they want to change some of the structure, that would start probably breaking your tests. So that's probably something that you would do and they would interact with. But again, it depends on how good your designer or how much flexibility you want to give them. And especially if you write tests, you need to go and look at it. So first of all, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the conference.